Good evening and welcome to the DPX. I'm Larry Vogel and I will be your host tonight. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to our DPX March 14th, 2024. Like I said, we only have maybe 5 or 6. Not everybody's here who sent in images. Paul Lawrence and Gene Eichenlaub, who sent in images, aren't here yet, but we'll see if they pop in. Other announcement is our DPX AI is March 28th. Did I get the date right on that? Yeah, March 28th, the last Thursday. Same time, different link to get in, different meetup site, so you can go there if you're interested. We're still kind of kicking around, I think, figuring out what the group is all about. It's a lot different than what we do here. We don't get not as many images come in, but we're able to spend more time talking about some of the things that are happening with AI, some of the techniques of how to use it, and when you're not allowed to use it. That's the other big thing now is like, so the San Diego Fair put out their official rules for this year, and they had some, so a flat cannot use AI, but they didn't go on to explain it. But I think most of their AI is like not using a prompt to generate an entire image. But the idea that AI is a part of Photoshop now, that you are allowed. This was the funny part. You're allowed to use generative fill as long as you don't use a prompt. And we'll talk a little bit about that because I actually there's an image tonight that I worked on. I talked to a few people about what was behind that idea, and I suspect it was mostly to say that if you're using generative fill, like you make a selection and you click on generative fill and just let the machine fill that space, it's kind of like content-aware fill, but much better at it because it's using AI to fill in that space. But as soon as you use a prompt, then you can actually insert something into the space. So without using a prompt, it's generally just going to take out whatever was there or fill a space, kind of like I said, like content-aware fill, but better. So I think that was their effort, was to keep it from creating objects into your image, which I don't know. It's the other thing too that came up right away, and I think most people have the same response, is like, how are they going to know whether you used a prompt or not with the tool? And I think they're relying a lot on the integrity of the artist. And so, but I do know already, there's people who have said that, I don't agree. If I can put more control over what generative fill is going to do by using a prompt instead of just letting it work on its own, then why not? If it improves that image, it improves the image. And so the integrity of the artist is, I think, an interesting comment. So I mentioned this before, that all the DPX videos that we do, so I do record the meetings, and I end up putting them on the YouTube channel, so you can go there to see them at any time. Used to upload them and then people had to download them to watch them, but it's one of those things that after you've done it for like so many years, then all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, let's just throw them up on YouTube. Then nobody has to download them. They're always there. You can watch them from anywhere. You don't have to have it downloaded to your computer. So there's two spots for the regular DPX meetings and the DPX AI meetings. So you can check out either one if you want to see what we're doing there. Monday mornings are still happening. So Monday morning at 10 a.m. each week, we do a Photoshop on the fly hour or two. It's almost always 2 hours, but so there's a link here for that. If you can go to my website, there's also a link there for the Photoshop on the fly where you can get into the morning meeting. We use the same link every week, so if you want to send me an email, I can send it to you. Our exhibition at 2020 Gallery is up. This one was called AI OK. The idea, though, was still kind of centered around using traditional and non-traditional images in the show. So, in fact, my little conversation with Chat GPT helped me come up with. I originally had just said to Rob about, I go, well, why don't we do a show called AI OK? He goes, I like that. Let's do it. And I go, but we got to do something to let people know they can submit traditional images. So my chat with GPT created the subtext was the lens versus the machine, a dialogue in pixels. And I go, that again, my good buddy AI does it again. So that show is up. There's some traditional, non-traditional images. The opening night is March 19th, so that's coming up in next Tuesday from 6 till 9. The gallery is located in the Pendleton Eye Center in Oceanside, so if you're interested, you can come there. And this time, connected to the exhibition, we're also going to do, in fact, part of this A Dialogue in Pixels just ended up being a perfect title for the second event we're going to do. So we're going to do a Saturday, April 6th, Saturday morning, like at 10 a.m. We're going to have sort of a dialogue event. We don't call it a panel discussion, but more of a conversation about AI, talk about some of the images in the show. Some of the artists who are available to be there will be present and talk about their work. And I think a part of this, the fun part, is going to be going through the exhibition and seeing, if you can tell which ones are AI, which ones are not, which ones are maybe a mix of the two of them. I don't know that's going to be that difficult, but there's a bunch of online things where you can go take that test and see if you have, if you can figure out which images are AI and which ones aren't. It's kind of stacked against you being able to figure out and get 100%. I went on to a couple of them, and I think on one of them I got like 9 out of 12, because a lot of times they put in photo composite images that are just really well done, and they seem so kind of, so way out wacky from a traditional photograph that you kind of are guessing, going, well, that could be AI, but it also might not be. And the thing about it, when you're not really quite sure, in the guessing game here, you've got a 50-50 chance. And so at some point you're just going, well, okay, I'm going to say it is. And it turns out that it's maybe not. So anyhow, this will be fun. It's going to be a chance to come and talk about where all of this is headed and how it fits in or maybe doesn't fit into to our photographic world. There's Osea. Welcome, Osea. Even though I can't see you. All right.
I don't see it.
Everybody.
So if you're interested in that, that'll be Saturday, April 6th at 10 a.m. I know it's a Polyphoto Club meeting also. I think Judy McLean had sent a thing right away. She's in the show, and so she had sent me a thing right away. Oh no, this is a Polyphoto day too. And I just said to her, I go, well, you know how life is. There's not enough Saturdays in a month. Look at that. Osea's changed.
I know how much you love cats.
You have to be careful because Gary had a dog barking in the background earlier. You guys will be
I know.
video cameras are going to be at each other. That's a furry tale. All right. Pismo Beach Workshop coming up May 17th. I think there's only 2 spots left, so if anybody's interested, jump on it as soon as you can. I have a feeling it may fill up by the time we do the workshop. And I think that's about it. This was the announcement. I don't know, it was very small. The announcement for the show at Ace Gallery Community Art Space. The show is called Share the Love. Again, pretty abstract image. But they already had the opening reception, but the show, I think, does she have the date up here completely? It doesn't say. So it should be up through February, through March. Or this is March, so by the end of March probably. So only a few weeks probably left on it. But if you can to be able to support Studio Ace, it's a great space. You can actually go. They have a website and they have a big Instagram presence. There's a lady there who does all of their social posting and stuff. So she has quite a bit of stuff on Instagram also. So that's kind of everything that I have. If anybody has anything they want to add to the group about anything amazing that you've done. Tell us about how you won the lottery and you want to share all your winnings with DPX. That would be grand. Um, or Don Lyons when he gets through with all that property, his property mogul business.
And I'll be about 95 when that's all done.
A couple of years. Hey, all right.
Yes.
It's taking
If I
too
win
much.
the lottery, I promise to share it with you, okay?
Oh, yeah, okay.
I do.
It'll just be, it might only be a nickel, but I would appreciate anything.
Hey, hey,
I have a friend who likes to play the penny stocks, and he says if I hit it big, he says I'm sharing it with you, Larry. I go, well, good. I won't hold my breath while I'm waiting for that penny stock to come in.
You know why they're called penny stocks, don't you? Because that's exactly what they're worth.
Yeah, they hold their value. That's good. All right. Well, I don't see Paul Lawrence in the room today, and he usually is the first man on the board, but we'll see if he shows up late, then we'll jump into him. So
No, he has to go to the back of the line.
okay. Well, and he missed
What is
last
that?
month, so
Oh,
that means he's
well.
he's 2 months ahead of the game here.
Wow.
So first up will be Ann Collins tonight. Somehow I got
Hey.
these in a weird order. So here is our red boat on the lake. So did you haul that canoe all the way out there so you can get the red canoe shot on the lake?
no, it just happened to be there.
Nice.
Having my breakfast at a picnic table there on the beach, and these couple were there, and they were going to go out, and I did shoot them going out,
Mhm.
but I thought, I'll start with this one. This is HDR, and I had some trouble because the branches of the trees were moving,
Hmm.
but after watching, I think it was Nick Page, his free presentation about exposure blending, I was able to get it to work without the branches moving.
So even the deghosting didn't do it for you?
Oh, I tend not to use it because I've never had any good
Oh,
luck with that.
interesting. Okay.
I think I was doing it manually, so I didn't use Photomatic.
Oh, okay. Well, but even the Photoshop version has a deghosting. So anyhow, looks great. I mean, it worked. Whatever you did. So
Anyway, this is the Adirondacks a few
Okay.
years ago in the fall.
Nice. It's a great image.
Thank you.
You know, Nick Page, I follow Nick and watch all of his YouTube content. He and Sean Bagshaw, you probably know, have that deal coming up at Portland Airport here shortly. I was actually
What?
thinking about jumping up and doing that. It's kind of a post-processing summit.
oh,
I did know.
Yeah, check it out.
Okay.
He's great.
And I think it was through out of Chicago. They offer a lot of free webinars type stuff. They have a YouTube channel. So I think his presentation was on that.
okay. All right. Any comments or suggestions for Anne on this image?
You know, I think it's a very nice, calming image, and I think it might help for that effect to take whatever's in the boat, that
Oh.
gray thing, I don't know what it is,
Backpack.
and also the
Mhm.
paddles that's sticking out.
This one. Yeah. I think I would.
That and then
I actually like that
Uh,
one.
I know you can't see what I'm pointing to, but
No, I can't.
Is that reflection? Is that reflecting on the left side of the boat where it's white?
Yeah, there's water and trees. It's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it's picking up the shore area here and then the darker area of the trees.
So, Joan, you're suggesting you get rid of the backpack?
I agree with that.
Yeah, I would at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
As far as the color balance, any suggestions? I had a hard time with it being either too green, too red, too blue.
I think the color balance looks okay to me. Anybody else?
I don't know. Could the sky be a little lighter?
Well,
Yes, it could.
there is. I mean, there's a couple of spots. Even though you had mentioned that you've done HDR that are at least here in the JPEG anyhow that are look like they're approaching blown out in certain areas. Um, there's actually maybe this isn't so bad down in here, but the one on the left and the one here on the right hand side. The the other thing too that looked at was this area over here on the right. My first thought was, oh, I think I would take this little intrusion out on the right, but then I also don't like this sort of big gap that's presented on the
Yeah.
right hand side either. And so, and rather than cropping, we've talked about this before, that not only when you crop, I mean, so you end up getting rid of that empty hole, but then it also changes the format of the picture. And sometimes, like in this image, I think that horizontal feeling works even though you're only talking about a small bit on the edge. And so I ended up, oops, let me go back here. I ended up doing a content aware scale. So I scaled it so that everything, this, like the boat didn't distort. I mean, it didn't change the boat hardly at all, but it allowed me to use the whole space and bring this over to the edge. And the only thing was, it was trying to figure out that the tree has a little bit of a lean to it here. And so, as you get over there, you don't want just a little bit of that dark branch coming in from the corner either. And so that was kind of about where it ended up cropped. I mean, that was without adding anything to it. I will say something, and this will come up a little bit later too, but one technique that I've been using, and again, depending on whether, again, if the bracketed exposures allow you to get into these areas, one way to get rid of these blown out areas I've done in the past is just, making a selection and using content aware fill. And 90% of the time it does a good job. But now you could also just use generative fill, no prompt, so you can still put it in the fair and fill in the burnout highlights. And I mean, generally, this is a simple thing. Like I say, even content aware fill usually does a great job with it. The thing I like about generative fill is you get 3 options, and if you don't like those, you can do 3 more. But see right there, that looks, without even going through it, that looks great. And so the difference of having those almost blown out areas to that, it just fills it in perfectly. And so I've used it a lot on images where there might be, these hot spots and things. So these down here are a lot smaller, but definitely, pretty simple to do. And there's very seldom any kind of distortion or recognizable fact that that object doesn't, that cloud looks funny. It's just like, how do you distort a cloud?
Right.
Yeah, that's one of the best things about doing any kind of a retouch or fill on a sky.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, just
Perfect.
this is, and this is part of what makes this new tool so amazing, is that like I said, you might get away with using content aware fill, but sometimes you'll get a repeat of a cloud, right? It'll grab information from somewhere and fill that. And the big difference between these two fills is that content aware fill is obligated to using pixels from your image, where generative fill uses the image to inform itself on what to create there. And none of these are probably going to look bad. Just fills it in. I like that one maybe better. So that kind of fills in those spots. So the only thing you have to be aware of when you're using these, eventually what I usually end up doing is, if I'm happy with them, I like keeping all of my retouching onto a single layer. So I would take those and then just merge these together, or merge those layers, so that all the retouching now is all. So there's this expansion too. I left it on a separate layer too, but so then all the retouching is on that one layer. But you just have to know that you need to make sure that you like the results that you got, because you lose the other 2 that were part of the process, or how many ever times you do that. Now the other thing too is that whether or not this will actually do it too. So making a selection for content aware fill or for generative fill is best, rather than just trying to hug right close to this thing, this is where this object meets this black border here, where you really need to include this as part of the selection. And the hope is, and we'll see what it does to that bar and the, so I add a little more to this, what it does to the bar and that little part of the ore down there. So if you don't include this in there and you just try to like go along the edge there, it's fighting itself to figure out what's on that edge. So if we just tell it to do that one, let's see what it does. It'll be one of those things if it really does it and it fills in this little bar. Yeah, see there, it didn't do it, but here this one looks better. Look at that, it finished the bar here, it finished the paddle here. And let's see this one. Yeah, see, you lost that one. So and I think sometimes that the thing to do now is when you come up to the three options that are here in the properties panel, is to take this one and throw it away, or even rate it. Just go, that's poor. And they're going to give you this chance to come through and fill this out. You don't have to do it. Let's just cancel and then toss it out. And I think what it does is it lets the thing know, like this was the second one was the better of the three. This one's not too bad on that bar. I might just leave that in there and then just say generate again and let it just do its thing and see if you get better results. And there's in some way of thinking that telling it what it did right and what it did wrong, it may get better. Like, see, that one's even a little bit better. This one's missing more of the bar, and this one made some kind of a weird. So the other thing you can do too is, like, this has a weird thing below the paddle. So you can come in and say, okay, well, this paddle looks really good, and this bar looks not great. This one here, closer, but anyhow, you could play with them later. But so you could actually, so if I duplicate this layer, I could actually choose, say, on this top one, if I want to use this bar, and then on the bottom one, if I want to use the one that has the better paddle, that one there, or that one. So on these, what I could do now is then just go ahead on the mask and take a brush with black and paint out all this other part in here. So I'm just going, I need to be at 100%. So I'm just going to keep the paddle portion of that. And then come back to this one and paint out this lower section down here. Oops, you be on the right, let me undo that, get on the right mask here. And then paint out the paddle portion of the second one here. So I have to be careful. Let me go back up to there. And there we go. So you could actually end up using two generative, or actually not two, but you're even selecting different ones of these to use by doing a copy and saying, okay, this one's better here, this one's better there. Just control the masks and end up with a better fill.
That's interesting.
All right.
Okay.
Say so. Any other comments or questions about the image or techniques or?
I think a little vignette and a little darkening of the foreground
Down
might
here.
help.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love the sky. I almost want to see it a little more dramatic.
So
Yeah, I think to make it black and white and then just push everything.
So I will usually use a curve, and in this case too, usually when I'm vignetting, I want to kind of pull down on the upper area just to kind of darken the brightest parts at the same time, because sometimes when you just darken it, then the brighter areas become even more visible by doing that. So with the black mask, and then taking a brush and with white, and let me do it at say 50%. And I don't think the left side needs much, but maybe more over here than there. And that's not a lot, but I think I would agree it kind of helps. Let me paint some of that back. And there's still some highlights there. And again, this still goes back to the idea that, so on those highlights, I mean, in the past, I would probably say, I would take and use the clone stamp tool just to take out those brighter areas. But, now, I mean, you could use generative fill. The other thing you can do with the clone stamp tool, so if I selected this texture here, and I don't want it to lighten up anywhere else, is I can put the clone stamp tool's blend mode, it happened to already be there, on darken. And so the only thing it's going to do, and maybe I could, I'll pick a little darker area somewhere in here. So it'll only clone in the pixels that are darker, rather than taking, some of the lighter values and going over the area. So sometimes, I mean, that's kind of the easier way to handle those brights, rather than going in and burning them in. So even this area over here, I might grab some of this and leave it on darken. And it's going to be hard to turn it off and on because it's going to change the ratio. But yeah, I think that helps those little spots. Yeah. Oops.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go back here. So that's the before. That's the after. So, I didn't mention, so yeah, the content aware scale. So under, oops, I'm sorry, up here, let's move. So under edit and content aware scale, by using the content aware scale, it will allow you to drag this thing out. Let me just pull it down a bit. So this is how much I pulled over, but you'll see that the boat will change a little bit. But I mean, again, this is one of the things. If you don't merge down your generative fills, then you run into a problem. But so I got to hold down Shift at the same time. So now you can see that the landscape moves a lot quicker than the boat. The boat does grow a little bit. You can also go in and make a selection of the boat. And once you've made a selection of the boat and saved it, it'll show up on this list up here. So let me just undo that. So let's go back. Actually, let me turn these off for now, and I'll just duplicate this. So before I go to expand it, I could take the object selection, and we'll just ask it to select the boat. Okay, so there's the boat, and then we need to go up under select, and we need to say save selection. If you're using the Kuiper panel, there's a nice little shortcut there, but we'll call it boat. And say okay. And so now we'll just deselect that. And so now when we go to do the the edit and content aware scale, if we look on this list now, the boat is listed there. So now as we drag this over, I got to hold down Shift. I keep forgetting to do that. So now as you drag that over, there's no change in the boat. So if that little bit of distortion bothers you, that's the thing you can do, is you can go in and you can make a selection of that object and then tell it to use that selection to identify that area I don't want to change. And then that'll give you those results. So now our generative, oops, did I say don't do it? No, I turned it off. Our generative fill stuff, it's not bad, but if you zoom in on it, you'll see it doesn't quite fit because the boat on the first one did move. So there's a weird little thing in the paddle. So there's a tiny change in the size. But yeah, that's the way you can protect an object and have it not shift. All right.
Very nice.
So in this winter, like February and January, I went to Grand Teton National Park and also to Colorado. And this was in the park Tetons, and it was very foggy. And I forget now. Let's see, is this a?
This was your before. Yeah.
Okay, I have this. This is processed, but I then added the Orton effect to this version.
Okay.
And I'm wondering which one you prefer.
So that's the first one. Pretty subtle, but I do like the second one. Paul Lawrence jumped in. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah.
How
I
was your
like the
pizza?
second one too.
But we took a
How was
vote.
your pizza pie?
We took a vote though before you got here, because I said if Paul jumps in, then we'll go back to look at his images, and Don Lyon said no, he has to move to the bottom of the pile now.
I second.
That's right. I have to sit by
see,
Dawn.
it says I
That's a
second
new
that.
rule.
All right, so back to Ann's image. The before, the interesting thing is the Orton effect also added a little more contrast, right? The trees got a little bit darker too. I don't know. I mean, the Orton effect generally will add kind of a glow effect to things, and it's pretty subtle. So anybody want to vote on before or after?
Or on whether Paul goes to the back of the bus.
Well, that's already been decided, I think.
Okay, all right, that's good.
Yeah. I'm voting for after on the Orton effect. It looks good with it.
Yeah, I like it too.
I do like that.
Yeah.
I did, keep the Orton effect pretty subtle because I, changed the opacity based on what I think looks better or worse. And so this was my liking.
Yeah, it can get heavy-handed and be, that soft glowy thing can sometimes be a bit much. But the cool thing about your image, I think, because of the sort of frost on the trees and the fog and all that, it's already got a little bit of that, even without it, it still has a little bit of that kind of hazy glow anyhow because of the weather. But what a great conditions to be photographing in.
Oh my gosh, we had the best conditions. It was amazing. I will say I had to remove about 3 telephone wires from this photo.
That's
You cheated?
That's why they created Photoshop. make us better photographers. Well, so there was a quote that Ansel had years ago about burning and dodging, and it was burning and dodging are tools that we use to fix God's mistakes in lighting nature. So I might be paraphrasing a bit, but that's pretty close to how it was actually done. So fixing God's mistakes in how nature was lit. And then Photoshop was created to take out all of man's crap that they spread all over the nature, all over the natural environment. So, all the stuff you want to take out, that telephone wires and all the junk.
Yes.
And now you can get it into some of the camera clubs who tell you that landscapes cannot show the hand of man. So I think the telephone wire would be an objection. It also doesn't look good either. But
Then the rule can't clone anything out.
Right. That's another camera club. You can't clone anything out. So like you're screwed. That's just you got to leave the telephone wire in. It's just the most ridiculous thing, I think, when we create these rules. That the only category that deserves it is documentary, and I even have an argument for that. If you were doing a documentary image and there's a Coke can laying somewhere that you can't get to, or you didn't see it when you took the photograph, why couldn't you take the Coke can out of a documentary photograph? Because it doesn't change the story. It's better when it's not there. And there's arguments to be made for some very famous images that have been documentary photographs that have been retouched. The Dorothea Lange image of the migrant mother and all that. Definitely
The famous thumb.
The famous thumb, yes. So anyhow, any comments about this image for Anne, other than congratulations on being there? I think you did a great
Nice
job
shot,
of processing. Go ahead, Osea. Loving it?
I said I love the Orton effect. It was very nicely used.
Thank you.
The only thing I wanted to
I
see was, our typical thing about, flipping an image, because, and not that there is sort of a leading left or right, but there's something about whether that, the size of the larger group of trees being on the left side or the right side of the frame. And so
I like the image weighted on the right.
the trees on the right.
I was just thinking maybe I'd try darkening the trunks of the trees on the left, maybe to
On
balance
your
a little
left.
bit more.
Yeah, stop flipping the image.
Short trees.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. The ones on the right look terrific. I love how
Yeah.
nice and crisp
Yeah,
darkness is.
the difference from there to there, it really does bring out. And there is that, when we talk about adding, distance and definition and all that to an image, that idea that, things that are closer to the camera, and especially in this case where there's fog, things that are closer to the camera can be increased in contrast a bit, because they would have less of the fog and everything on them, but it adds to the distance. It creates that, it brings them forward, and then makes the back end feel like there's more depth between the foreground trees and the background trees. So I definitely think it helps.
I like the way it was originally presented.
This way.
I like the way it's sort of, I mean, naturally you want to look, because we're going to read left to right, obviously. But boom, you get those darker trees, that increased contrast and punch, and it sort of stops you from leaving the image.
Okay.
So wait, say it again.
My original
So you like this one here without the added contrast?
I like the way she processed it.
Wait a minute,
Yeah.
you've confused me now.
the darker trees on the right.
So this one,
I like the dark. Right.
okay,
I like the darker trees on the right without flipping the image.
yeah, okay,
Yeah, we're all in
I'm
consent.
kind of going in on the left, and then boom, my eyes gravitate right to those trees, and it holds me there, and I'm not let out of the image.
My original goal in processing was to have the frosty parts stand out against the background, but not get the background so dark that I lost the foggy effect.
hmm
Yeah.
mission accomplished.
It's beautiful. Oh,
There's Judy.
question on the Orton effect is, yeah, I'm here.
Hmm.
Is that the Orton effect found in the TK?
I don't use TK.
Oh,
I watched
so is that
about
a fil-
3 or 4 YouTube videos about Orton effect, and they all use different methods.
Yeah,
And so I'm kind of just trying out the different methods to see what I like best and what doesn't make my image too big a file. Because one of the methods has you making 2 background copies,
Mhm.
and it's like, oh my gosh.
So you're building it yourself just in Photoshop?
Yes.
So not filters or anything?
No. I mean,
Okay, beautiful.
one of the things it says to add high pass filter because you might lose some sharpness
Sharpness,
in parts of it, and you don't want to do that, and so you add the high pass filter to parts. And
Oh, okay.
well, and the interesting thing too is that the Orton effect is originally a darkroom effect. It was done in the darkroom, and so when digital
Yes,
came
yeah.
along, a lot of people tried to figure out a way to bring that technique over digitally, and I think that's why there's also so many different variations on it. But it also fits the typical formula of Photoshop. There's 100 ways to do the same thing, so
Yeah.
you try
and
them.
several of the methods said to add a levels, either adjustment layer or just a regular add the levels right to the Orton effect layer.
Mhm.
And so you're adding more contrast so you don't lose the contrast.
Right.
Now, doesn't Nick also have an Orton effect in one of its
I don't
presets?
think so.
Well, Glamour Glow
Yeah.
is kind of like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I
But
tried.
I just tried the one in TK, and it's adjustable, really nice. One click, easy slider.
Yeah, I was wondering. I was trying to remember. I mean, that's the one thing. So in the TK panel, his actions are all they're just. They're just actions, right? So,
Right.
so you can actually look at it
Got
and,
Orton and Smart Orton.
and figure it out, right? So to see which technique he used on the thing. So where am I at?
So it's an action, but does it have adjustable parts to the action
Yeah, you can.
layers or?
Yeah, so you can put all that in. So he has a Orton effect, and then he also has a Smart Orton, and I think the Smart Orton's the one that's probably more adjustable. So, and even though it stops here for you to add in, how strong you want the effect to be, you can dial it back. But I'm not going to play with it much, but just say okay. So I just wanted to look at when you get done on here. So what he does, he puts all of the Orton into to a group, and then in that group. The thing that you can do, the blur that we just did, it's done as a smart filter anyhow, so you can always go back and readjust how much you want to apply. So that's readjustable.
Yeah.
And then is that a bypass filter in there too?
This one up here is,
or
yeah.
no, that's Lindsay.
And so the difference too is that the first one with the Gaussian blur is in a multiply mode, and then the one with the oh geez, I drew a blank on you just said it on the high pass filter
high pass? Is that high pass or
is in a linear light mode, and it's at 40%, which then also makes this adjustable too. So that would bring back some of the sharpness, so you can play with that, or you can get even more of a glow by adjusting that. And then this is a curve adjustment that isn't. It looks like it's not used. There's nothing here, so you could use this to also bring back a little more contrast to it, which would be kind of like what Ann was saying on the other one, using the levels adjustment, and that could be used. The other thing you could do with this one too is you could always change a blend mode and add contrast by going to, well, overlay is going to add too much brightness, but yeah, see, I would prefer to do it with a curve anyhow. And then that way you can control, because especially depending on the image, Ann's image already has a lot of really bright areas in it, so you're already kind of pinned over on the wall there, so you really wouldn't want to move it much further. But you could definitely play with all of it. And then in the end, you can take the whole group and dial the strength of the effect back here also. So without even playing with it. Go ahead.
In the whole group.
You're right. So then that just controls the strength of how much you've applied to it. So yeah, everything in here then becomes adjustable.
Or you can use blend it.
In the highlight mode here, so this is set to screen. So that's already lightening it also. So that and that's at 100%. So you can dial the screen mode back too. So there's a lot of play inside of this
Mask
adjustment here. Yeah, and you can also add a highlight mask and everything else. So that would give.
It's a lot of decision making.
Yes, it is.
I will tell you,
Yeah.
most of the methods that I read about, they recommended when you use Gaussian blur that you use the number of pixels or megabytes, whatever, to match your files of your image. Like my files are about 25 megabytes.
Yeah.
And so they say use 25 pixels as your blur.
Wow, that's a lot. That's funny. I mean, it's it's a weird. I think it's a weird analogy, but okay. I mean,
Yeah, but you knock it back with the opacity,
Right.
so it's not getting that many.
right.
That's true.
All right.
Okay, well, I'm glad this image worked for
So
you.
you could do the same thing too. Is you could write yourself an action, right? So everything that the tutorial tells you to do, you can create an action for yourself. Record all those steps, and then that way, again, and if you did it in a way, the same way that Tony Kuiper's done here, if you do it in a way that makes each one of them adjustable. So like in this case, the Gaussian blur layer is a smart filter, so that allows you to re-edit that adjustment. The unblur again has an opacity adjustment. Linear light is what it is using to bring back some of the sharpness, and then the adjust contrast is added in here, but it's originally it's put in with no adjustment, but it's there so that you could adjust it yourself. And I kind of like the same thing he did here too, was naming your layers, right? So you kind of go, oh, okay, so this one's here to adjust the contrast, and I can play with this to play with the contrast. This is labeled as the unblur layer, so I know that this is going to bring some sharpness back, and I could do that by bringing up the percentage higher or lower. And then the blur, and it's marked for shadow blur. So if you look at the thing here, it's because he's done a oh, he hasn't changed this. That's interesting. So did he change this? I think those are default.
So Larry, does it? You have to have it be a smart object to begin with, or does it, or is it a smart filter on a not smart object?
No, you can't. So yeah, they did something recently in here. They have this convert for smart filters. It's the same thing. All it does is make this a smart object so that when you add a filter, it's automatically a smart filter. So you have to convert this layer. So this is probably, a duplicate layer, but it looks like he might have done something to it, because it looks like if we turn all of these off, oops, we'll turn that off. Oh, I gotta leave the group on. So those are off, and let's turn that off, and turn the filter off, and then turn this off and on. So it is different. Oh, and I gotta put this back to normal. So it's weird because it is a weird washed out, and I don't see here in the blend if function or anything in here if he's changed anything. Doesn't look like it.
Uncheck the preview, see if there's a difference.
Yeah, you'd have to make a change.
Is he making a copy that's then converted to a smart object?
Well, that's what I was trying to see, but
this?
this one here is brighter than the background, the original background layer by quite a bit. Interesting.
Yeah.
So he's doing something to this first. So I wonder, let me do this. This is another thing. So if I just take this and throw it out and then run it again, actually, let me do this. History. Go back to open. All right. And then now run it. We'll just take that as is. And then now look at the history. So his one that he's calling, oh, so it doesn't give you a breakdown. So there you go. You can't follow his method then.
Much for that idea.
So yeah, I don't know what he's doing to this one here, because it does appear to be brighter than the background layer. I mean, you can't even see it in here. It's not near as strong.
It's on multiply.
I know, I put everything back to normal. So turning all of these off, putting this back to normal, and
Normally,
turning the
I didn't change the blend mode, I don't think, for the Gaussian blur layer.
yeah. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll use darken rather than multiply. They'll use darken for the blur layer, and then again, rather than linear light, they might use overlay, because the linear light adds a lot more contrast. But if you've got it dialed back, that much, it might make a difference. He uses a lot of his actions, the linear light adjustment. And also there's on a lot of his, also like his burn and dodge layers, or he's using, instead of just using overlay for everything, sometimes one of them, burn might, I forget which order they're in, but burn might be in a soft light and dodge might be in overlay mode, which is another reason for creating two separate layers, because he's using two different blend modes with a gray layer to do that with. Anyhow, yeah. All right, so everybody voted the 4 for the Orton effect that you did, and then this was your.
This is my raw photo.
And here is the final photo.
Yeah, so I am open to suggestions if you like it better with the more contrast or whatever.
All right. Any comments? I still got to get one of those, a little cricket sound effect here. Any comments? All right. So I just wanted to see if I wanted to load in. Huh.
Is there a way of getting more detail in the snow?
Yeah. There are a lot of animal tracks that will show up too.
Oh.
There's a river otter living right in that area.
So again,
Cool
kind of like your tree image where the trees had a little more contrast too. So I just wanted to see about letting the background stay as, bright as it was in the original one, but bringing a little bit more detail into the foreground area. And you could even do this with, let me just turn that one off for now. If I put it into a group and then using a gradient to see if we're going, yeah. So you could use a gradient to get a little smoother transition. I don't know. So that's the way the second version was, and this is a blend of the two of them.
Okay, I kind of like that, keeping more fog in the background.
Yeah, I do too. And on this, I'm just kind of playing with the opacity of this whole group, which is the softness. So the mask is, the gradient mask is taking it out completely out of the foreground and blending it back. And then if you change the opacity of the whole group, so if I turn it all the way off, then it's like just looking at the bottom layer. So you can also then dial back some of that into the background. So it kind of gives you maybe even a little more control. I do like it with a little more detail in the background. I mean, a little less detail in the background.
That one tree in the upper left-hand corner bothers me. I haven't figured out what to do with that yet.
Oh, come on.
The dark part at the top. I lightened it up a lot already,
This is also one of the cool things about the generative fill too, is that you can do the retouch, on top of everything, because it looks at all the layers combined together. And so, and there's also another function. I'm going to add a little more down. And it'll be interesting to see if it actually does do enough or too much. Maybe it puts in a whole new tree. But a lot of times what I'll do too is like, take the contrast or the darkness out of it almost. Well, it looks better with it gone now that it's done. That kind of fills in that space the same way. So, and sometimes you could do, a content aware fill and then dial back the opacity. So it kind of brings the original shape back, but not to the strength that it was. So sometimes that's easier to wash it out. But with this, you have to be careful that you don't get, because at some point you're going to get sort of a ghosted image of the two of them.
Yeah.
And with, in this image, it probably works okay because of all the branches and stuff. But that gives you sort of like both effects together. But I would agree. I would take it down some like that.
Okay. This trip was amazing. There was so much wildlife. I mean, I have pictures of moose and hundreds of elk and bison in the fog, and there were red foxes and coyotes and eagles.
How long were you out for?
I was there for a week. The workshop I was with ran for about 3.5 days. We just really lucked out with the conditions because the same workshop last year never even saw the Tetons.
Wow.
But we did see the Tetons on a number of occasions, cleared up with fog, halfway up, and it was just amazing.
Yeah, that's the fun part about being a workshop instructor on location. It's like all the things that are out of your control.
Yeah.
But then when this happens, then everybody goes, "Oh, the instructor took us to the perfect places. He knew what he was doing." So,
Yeah.
wish. All right, thanks, Ann. Yeah, beautiful. My gosh, what a great trip.
Thank you.
So, do you feel like you'll be processing images from that trip for a long time to come?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
There are so many worthy of processing.
So Jean didn't pop in today, but I'm going to show this only because it was interesting thing on generative fill, and that same idea. So yeah, she's got this seagull, I guess it is, eating a fish. My one comment was getting closer to it, but again, she has a lot of this sort of blown out areas of the bird, and unfortunately, I mean, she sent it to me as a PSD file, so I think it still is in 16-bit. But even then, there would be so much more you could actually do to the raw file, and so the comment is like, really pay attention to these kind of values, because if I turn this off, I mean, she did a lot of retouching also, but if I turn that off, there's nothing in her processing that caused this problem, because the background layer came in that way. But it could be back in the raw file, trying to bring out that detail as much as you can. And there is, and we've talked about this before, this could be the kind of image where having the linear profiles for your raw file processing as a starting point. Let me put this in here. So Tony Kuiper has he calls it a repository. So if you wanted to do a search for it, I just put in TK linear profiles and this linear profile repository. So you don't have to go out and recreate these profiles. He's already done all the work and he's put them up for free. The thing is, these profiles are so specific to camera brand and camera model. And so, I mean, a lot of work has been put into generating all these profiles, and he keeps it up to date, I guess as much as they can. And so you would pick whichever camera model you have, and then you would load that profile into Lightroom or Camera Raw, and that becomes your profile when you put in your raw file, and it will only recognize whatever the metadata is on that file. The linear profile that's designed for that camera will be the only one that's going to show up. And so, as an example, I don't have her raw file, but if shouldn't have one here. Let me see if I can I'll find a real quick one here. So, on a regular Monday morning, we always have a raw file somewhere here, I think. I just stuck it in here. This is where your memory comes in. Yeah, so here, that's a JPEG. So here's a raw file. So, and this is pretty certain from my Canon camera. So if I put this into Camera Raw, when it first comes into any file that comes into Camera Raw or Lightroom, up here you'll see where the profile is there. Whatever the default profile is, or whatever you've set up for a default profile, is what it's going to use first. And you can go through the list of profiles and pick out another one as a better starting point. But the one that will give you the greatest advantage is if I go in, and I have it loaded here, but if I go into Browse and I go to the camera under profiles. So when you load in the linear profile, that's this one here, and you'll see if you watch this sky, how much detail back in here, no matter which profile I use back in Camera Raw. So if I come back here and I go through these, so Adobe Color, Adobe Landscape, Adobe Neutral, that's kind of the one that has the lowest amount of contrast. And none of these profiles move any of these sliders. It's a beginning point where nothing has happened to your file yet, but somebody figured out that all of these profiles are adding contrast to your image. Adobe Portrait, and then if I go down to, because I have the linear one loaded here, and then the linear one, and there's so much detail comes back into the high values. Now it's going to look real flat to start with, but that's the whole idea. This is a totally unprocessed profile of your image, and the way they do it is they put it through the what is it called, the DNG, and they strip away any processing, any profiles in there, and so that creates this linear profile where now nothing has been applied to the camera. This is a true raw file where these other profiles are not really giving you a true raw file because this contrast is added there. Now the argument is, yeah, I could go in and say pull back the highlights and get that contrast back too, but the idea though is if you're starting with this to begin with, I could even pull this back further and get even more, right? So you're by starting out with that preloaded contrast, you have some limitations, and only because this image maybe has more detail there than something like the image that we have in Photoshop, maybe than on this bird image, maybe starting out with that linear profile would have given her more detail here. And I don't know because I don't have the raw file, so that's the kind of difference. So her processing that she did was, right, there was a little bit of retouching, some of the, looks might be raining, some of the spots in the water, and then an adjustment on the eye. And I don't know why she did this. I would have asked her if she came. It's like she actually, I guess it was to brighten the eye. Let's see, what does her adjustment look like? Really, there's no blend mode. Huh, this doesn't look like it does anything. Oh, I saw what it did. Let me go back. She's using the lower one, the output one. So she dropped the black slider to try to put more detail. It really flattens it out quite a bit. So, so yeah, that's what she did with the levels. And then the upper one was a vibrant slider. Now, one of the problem she has here is if I turn this all back off and go back to the background layer, there's a lot of noise in the image. And I don't know if this will show me her original metadata here. Let's see if it says what the ISO is. Yeah, so 3200 is her ISO. So she had to do some noise removal, and it doesn't say here what she used, but I'm guessing Topaz maybe. But there's a lot of artifacting going on from whatever settings she used inside of Topaz. So I'll just show you. I actually did a little bit. Here's the version I did here. And going into Topaz and the noise removal, I mean, there's several algorithms in there to choose from. But if you look at, you know, let me come back out one. If you look at the difference around the bird here and around, and it also looks like she may have ran hers through a sharpening too, and I haven't done that to the image yet on mine yet. But the problem is that she's got a lot of artifacting from those details. Now, one of the things I played with was because she wanted to work on the eye, was I went in and did a generative, replace the eye because it's kind of missing a lot of detail. And one of the tricks to doing this is if I used, and I'll just start from here. So this is generative fill with no prompt. So if I want to improve the eye and keep the integrity of the artist or the photographer by not doing any prompting, I would have, there's one eye option, there's that eye option, and here's one where it just basically put a hole in his head so you can see the water behind it. So I want to improve the eye, but I can't use a prompt according to some of the rules, right? So here is using a prompt just straight out of the box with the generative fill. And here's the 3 shitty versions that it created, right? This is even weird. It almost even created a face of a bird. And the prompt that I used was seagull eye, right? That's all I used, but that's in Photoshop. So one of the things that happens when you use a prompt and or any replacement function inside generative fill is that it works at what I'm going to say is 100%. And that means that you go in, you circle it, you put in a prompt, and then it generates this. Now, Tony Kuiper, again, the generosity here is he created a TK generative fill panel. And these are percentages that you can use. So instead of running it at 100%, which would be the default that we use inside of Photoshop, just by making a selection and writing in a prompt, would be the equal to using 100% here. And so in these 5% increments, you can start lowering the opacity, or not the opacity, but you're telling it to how much attention it's going to pay to the original image. So at 100%, it's going to just totally replace it on its own. Happy Woman was another one I was working on. So the prompt that I used in there was with I put in the up at the top you see Seagull Eye, and that was the equivalent of 100%. Then I went in and started using the TK panel, and this was the version of it at 25. So using this fill here, and the way that it would work is, if I turn those off, you would put a prompt in, and then you would select the brush, and then select one of these percentages. So you'd say 25%, and if you brush this in the shape that you want, that's where it's going to fill the area, but it's only going to, the fill is only using 25% of the power of AI versus using a larger percentage of your image. So this would use none of your image. This is using 75% of your image to generate the content of that area. So the results are much better, but you have to kind of still hunt and peck through these percentages. So this created an eye, and it gave me, in this case, 3 versions. They still look a little fake or cartoonish, even though I'm putting in Seagull Eye for the prompt. So that's 25. If I go down to 20, then I got eyes that looked more like, let me get to the right layer, down to 20 here. Then I got eyes that looked much better, closer anyhow, and I could keep generating. That was not too bad. But if I go down even lower to the 15% level down here and generate the eye, now it's paying more attention to the actual content of the image. Now it's getting some weird artifacts in here too. We're starting to generate some weird colors in there. So the one that I ended up using was the 20%. And if I turn this layer off, it generated some weird sort of purple artifacting. I don't know where it's getting that from, but so I just attached a hue saturation layer to it and dialed back that percentage, and looks like I could take it back a little bit further. But it definitely gave me a much more realistic, I'll leave it up a little bit, a much more realistic eye to replace it with. And if I look at the original eye, it's just kind of not very detailed. And so again, going back to the idea that you can't use a prompt, which means then you're stuck getting that. Oh, let's see, I got there. There we go. Or any one of these other versions. I need to be on the layer. Here we go. So that one, or that one is generated with no prompt. So I mean, this is where my question came in, is when they made the rule you can't write a prompt. So if this was going to be your results, then you would just have to say, okay, screw it, I won't get a good eye. But if I can write a prompt and I can use this tool that Tony Kuiper generated, I have a much better chance of succeeding at getting what I want. Why would that be so bad? I mean, that's the part I don't get, is to go, well, you can't get that because you have to use a prompt, and you got that. I'm sorry, that's the best you're going to be able to do. It just doesn't make any sense. So anyhow, that's the idea of using prompts with generative fill, and then this panel that Tony Kuiper, and there's again, if you go on YouTube, there's about, again, another 10 or 15 different ways that you can do this same effect manually. I mean, this is basically again, these buttons all create an action that Tony created to make this work. You can do it by, in fact, one of the methods is using quick mask, and then using that to fill this, whether you're filling it at 25, 50, 100, or whatever value you want. You can use quick mask to achieve the same thing. So on this image also, let me turn off that funky eye. just because I didn't have access to a raw file or couldn't do the linear, because since it's in Photoshop, it no longer has the metadata anymore to get into the linear. So I basically did a selection of all the blown out highlights and then did a generative fill, and it definitely made it better. I mean, so I'm only using generative fill on the highlights. So if you look at, this is the mask that it created. I painted the eye out because I was using the other one to do it with. But I actually ended up putting it into a group and then made a secondary mask up here to only paint in the areas that I wanted the generative fill stuff to show through. But this was the original selection that I made. And I just used select. Well, let me get out of here so you can see it. So if I get back here, turn off this layer, there's all the bright highlights. So you can use the Kuiper panel to do it, or if you do it manually, you can use color range. And under color range, you can just go to highlights, and then you can dial in the effect here, how strong, how much of the highlights do you want to show, and then adjust the fuzzy slider to include or exclude more of the values. So once you kind of get like, okay, there's my high values, you say, okay, you get a selection, and once you have that active selection, then which I don't know where it went. Here, I'll load it from here. So once you have that active selection, then you can then go to generative fill. And I used generative fill, but I didn't use a prompt. I just let it fill it in itself, and it actually did pretty good. And that was the results of, where did it go? That. I don't know why I'm getting that weird edge around it. Anyhow, if I go back to the open one. So that was the idea there, was improving the, well, that's where it is. Improving the noise removal, retouching, and then playing with that eye. Any comments or questions about that technique or techniques? I don't know where that other weird layer came in. There it is. Yeah, because there's my fill layer. Didn't really quite take care of that. Or maybe I didn't paint it through. Yeah, no, it did. So, and you can go back and do these over and over. I mean, kind of like what we did on the sky on Anne's image. You can use it to remove those blown out highlights. But I would suspect, and that's why I wish Jean was here tonight, is that the raw file might have given her more definition than playing around with that generative fill on the highlights. But it's a good way to fix things. Oh, this was another interesting one. So here's her original eagle image, and it has a similar problem in that this is all blown out, and so is this. There's a lot of color noise in here that should be dealt with also. So I did the same thing. I made a selection, and I think this one I didn't select highlights. I just selected around this lower part that was blown out, did generative fill, then did around the top and did generative fill. And here it is here. So it actually did. I mean, this one was pretty amazing. If you look at this, I don't know, it's zooming in too far on the smaller file. Anyhow.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Yeah. So there's the original one.
Wow.
And there's the fixed one, right? So it's weird. I couldn't get it to give the bigger head. So, oops, let me go back to her original one. This was, the top of the head was much taller. And it's like every time I generated one using generative fill, it almost on all of them made that top part smaller, but it still looks very natural. I was surprised that it looks okay, but the neckline was what was really amazing, that it actually put in all of those feathers. Pretty amazing.
Wow.
And that was with no prompt also. So what was that, Joan? All right. So that's Jean, who's not here. And Joan. So,
Thank you, Gene, in absentia.
well, Jean will be, she'll get the video.
Okay. Well, I was sort of into mannequins,
I guess, yeah.
and I thought this was sort of interesting. I mean, the story tells is kind of interesting. Uh, the hair is almost what she had. It was a little darker, and I wanted to make it, more the color of the dress and so forth. Anyway, any opinions about it?
All right. Anybody? Any comments?
Yeah, I like the object. It looks a little cut out to me,
Part of her
a
does
little
here.
unnatural.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But if I zoom in a little bit too,
Was the top of her blouse that orangey color, or
I think pardon me?
the top of her blouse,
Judy?
was it blue or was it orangey color? The top of her blouse,
Right.
this red color, was that there naturally?
red color. Is that natural color?
That was that color. That was how, actually, I changed a little bit of the image, blurred part of the left side, and then I changed her hair, which I didn't do a very good job of. But otherwise, and I did do this in topaz, so
Uh-huh.
I got this sort of fuzzy
Yeah, I love
look.
the way the hair matches the dress. That's really cool.
And did you
There's
create the
there's a
pattern on the
technique- I'm sorry.
dress? Or was that already there? This kind of, I mean, it looks a
Uh,
little liquefy or something, if that's...
The pattern was, I think the pattern was, there was a slight pattern on the dress of the same color. It wasn't as obvious.
Oh, okay.
And when I took it in topaz, I got this,
Okay.
which I kind of like.
There's a technique, Joan, where you can use a hairbrush and actually create some hair along that line where it looks kind of cut out there. That I think would help the hair quite a bit.
Well, and actually, this is a new thing too. I'll just show my other one. All I did was, I think these things on the edges, I just kind of took those edges out. But there's some really, I've seen so many really great tutorials where, we've always struggled with trying to make the hair look correct and all that. And the thing that, and again, because I haven't even played with the image yet, but the thing that you can do too is sometimes you can come in and you can use the generative fill by selecting, the edges here. And I'll just try to do the whole thing at one time and see what it does.
Oh, wow.
And then,
I hadn't thought about that.
and I mean, I always try it without a prompt first just to see what it does. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then go back in and use a prompt and try to, say,
You know what I was thinking?
wild curly
I
hair.
wonder if you could,
Go ahead.
I wonder if it was general. I mean, I love the pattern of the dress. I actually love the entire mannequin with the face not showing and the hat in the place of the face, and the fact that it doesn't have any arms, and especially the pattern of the dress. I love the fact that you tried to make the hair match that. I'm wondering if you could, because the hair really looks cut out. It almost looks like a wig that has been placed on top and not a very good one. Could you use generative fill to just say curly hair
That's what I just
with
did.
maybe
So I just typed in, I did one without a prompt, and then this one I just typed in wild hair. So we'll see what it does.
wild hair or curly hair with blonde highlight? Maybe.
Interesting.
Much better.
That's better, but not
Right.
great.
No. Try curly.
Right. Now, what were you saying about the hairbrush technique? I didn't understand that.
I'll show you one.
Well, I'll let Larry explain.
There's a bunch of ways of doing it.
Basically, create a
Look
brush.
at this one.
Go ahead.
It didn't really blend it very well, but
Like an
it's
Olympic
kind of getting the idea, right? So maybe if I come in and go, I'll say good, let it go, and then if I come back to these, I'll get rid of these and say, yeah, these aren't very good. Pull that down and go.
Maybe you select all the hair, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, why
Yeah.
is
It,
the edges of the
it
hair?
looks like this girl actually did have a really recent haircut.
Right. It looks really straight
Yeah,
at the
she
bottom
could
there.
have very
Very blonde.
So let's just try that. Wild curly hair. Let's try it again.
well, people
Yeah.
get that kind of haircut.
Yeah.
Curly hair with a ringlet type, it would be kind of nice because it would emulate what the pattern is on the dress.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the other thing we could do too is just see if we selected all the hair. So let's see if I could try to generate a object selection.
Just type Paul Lawrence in there.
Type Paul Lawrence.
Well, I know this technique worked on my model, one of my models.
Yeah.
Where you showed me how to just go around the edge, and it was just, I don't know if there was a stray hair.
I think part of it
bump
was
or
like
just
on yours because there was there was already like a bunch of
lost
flyaways and things. But we'll try
There were
using the
already
hairbrush too. But let's just see
flyaways,
here
yeah.
if I go back to generative fill, and we'll say.
Selection doesn't look right.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, it selected it off the other one. So let me come back to here,
Yeah.
and we will add to.
wavy, curly pink hair.
I think it might keep the color. We'll see if it does. Come on, because I have it on object selection. I actually wanted to just go to the lasso because I want to make it a little longer down there. All right, so let's see what it does. So wild curly hair, and generate. And yeah, I could say wild curly purple pink.
I can't wait.
The anticipation.
All this anticipation, yeah. That's a good name of a song.
Right.
Try-
So we
try
got
this
the
out.
hair, but we didn't
yeah,
get the
wow.
color. That's pretty good, actually. Well, that's not.
More,
Yeah.
oh, look at this
I
one.
think the first one was
No.
the best.
No,
That's
no.
pretty good there.
Yeah.
So let's see if we go
Yeah,
back
you
to
could just
wild
put a pink-
curly.
You can color
Pink.
Do we want to use
Pink
pink?
hair.
Okay, let's see how that does.
Yeah.
Let's say
Pink
generate.
purple. Yeah.
Right.
It's good.
Okay.
No,
Maybe
we
the use of
Oh,
wild.
no, that is just too much.
Did you say meow, please?
Wild curly.
Why don't you just shade this one pink?
What if we just said?
Shade the highlights.
I changed the hue.
Yeah, just change the hue. Do one of those color
Yeah, we could. I
overlays.
mean,
or
the
something.
cool thing is because this is sort of on its own layer. So let's just see if we do a, just for grins, without spending too much time. If we go, where the hell am I? Okay, so go to a hue saturation, and we will link it to the fill layer, and let's see. Green. That's interesting. So, and this is one of the things too, is when you do this, then you have to create a more perfect mask, but not impossible to do. So let's see. So we're not going to get, well, there's actually, it was more of a magenta colored hair, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
so the other way,
It's interesting.
let me turn that off. If I go to, let's do a solid color. Okay, that's about close here. So then we'll change this to color mode and dial it back a little bit. Let's see if we turn this off. Can we? Actually, that's really not that bright. So if I select
Yeah.
this color right there, and then now open that. This is what I love about this this color fill layer is it's constantly, you can go in and edit it. So now I can select from my new front color there and say okay, and then let's turn this back on. So, and then let me crank it back up because I dialed it way back. Yeah, so it's weird. It's not getting exactly what we want.
Yeah.
But you could go to some of the other. Uh,
You almost only want to have it in the shadows. Is that what you're doing? Because the brighter highlights could remain blonde.
well, almost
I think the hair is too realistic. It doesn't
right. It has
match
to go through the
what's happened
painterly
to it with the
technique.
topaz
Right.
stuff.
You'd have to run
Yeah.
it through the
Yeah.
same thing that you did with the topaz. But anyhow, that's sort of the idea. But that actually, I mean,
A lot
other than
of
the color,
us-
but all right.
Right. Yeah, I like the curly hair.
All right, so let's see. And then I'm going to go to the bottom one first, since because
Oh,
this one
yeah.
I was interested in knowing what you did to do this image.
Well, this was a composite of three different, actually the two men mannequins were standing together.
Mm-hmm.
I added the coffee pot. I really composed the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she was standing on or sitting on some sort of a bench.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I thought what I did to make it somewhat unusual, she has, even though she's a mannequin, she has a human face and hair, where the guys
So did this just come
obviously
off of
don't.
another image that you already had? Her face?
Pardon
Her
me?
face, did it just come from another photograph that you already had?
Right. Yeah, I had another
There,
photograph
There's
with
something interesting that
this
so
girl.
it all looks kind of cut out and there's no shadows and the pot and the thing here look more cartoonish than real. But there's still something about the image that, in some ways, I mean, a lot of people don't know who I'll mention, like Kurt Lightfoot does, but it kind of reminds me a little bit. John Linthurst is doing images kind of similar to this, where he's getting those old patterns that you could buy from like the fabric store and make your own dresses and stuff. And he's cutting out the characters off the front of these pattern things and then pasting them into other photographs, but with no attempt to make the cutouts look like they are real. It's like that they have been cut out. And so there's still something about whether the attempt to make it look real or not. That's kind of the question. Because there's a lot of things in here that don't, right?
Nothing, yeah, and nothing's real.
Right.
I mean, they're mannequins, so it kind of goes with the theme of,
But I kind of felt
the
like
theme of this.
a little more space. That's all I really did on this one. Was the idea of saying let's put a little more space on the right so that doesn't cut into the. And this was just the generative expand. But yeah, I mean, you could add shadows. Like she has a bit of a shadow. You could add shadows to them, which would make it look more realistic. Somehow in the masking, this guy's leg I think got a little thin. I don't know what caused that. And then this sort of
Polio.
yeah, polio, and this cut off of her dress here too. Looks, it would look better if it was hanging down. I think a little bit, but I don't know. I like the idea, but I think I would maybe still, finesse it just a little bit more. But I think not too much because I think in the sense that things. Well, and this arm is real too, right? Is that right?
No,
no. Okay,
that's the man.
interesting because it looks more. It doesn't have the shine on it like the plastic parts
Right.
do. It looks like it might be
Yeah.
more real. I like this idea though of adding, some realism back into the mannequins. It's an interesting idea.
I like the idea too. She is further back than the guys, and yet she's a lot
Bigger,
bigger.
uh-huh.
I think she needs to be scaled down. If you look from her knee to her ankle versus the closest guy's
Right.
knee to the ankle,
Yeah. And that's always a thing, you know, in compositing
Okay,
is
well,
getting those kind of scale relationships, lighting, all those sort of things.
Perspective.
Yeah, getting the
Yeah.
perspective, the lighting, the
right.
contrast, and all those things correct. But I would agree with that. Yeah, making either these guys a little bigger or her a little bit smaller. And that's a really hard thing. I mean, I can remember
Right.
years ago I did some stuff where I, you know, put just switched out heads, you know, on a body, and it's weird how the tiniest percentage, you know, larger or smaller, just makes it feel off, and it doesn't take much. And it's weird how our visual
Er,
perspective to those things is so influenced by realizing those size changes can make a big difference for sure.
Right.
All right.
Okay. Well, thank
Uh-huh.
you.
And then your last one,
Love your creativity,
I
John.
separated this one because it's
Are,
just so different than the other two, but oh, it's just beautiful. Tell us a little bit about it, Joan.
well, I had the lily. I mean, I quite a while ago I was into white flowers, and I had lilies, magnolias, and all kinds of things. And then I went back to work on this. I wanted to kind of give it an edge that wouldn't be considered a border,
Mm-hmm.
an edge that is sort of the part of the picture. And, I just worked on it a little. I see now the white petal going up toward the right corner is pretty blown out. I could
Yeah, but
do
that's the
something
difference,
with
though.
that.
With this kind of painterly technique, I think you can get away with things like that more so than something that's trying to look, you know, totally photographic. But yeah, I mean, you could knock that back a little bit. But I love the color tonality that you put into it, the feeling of the painterly areas,
Yeah.
and then also in some cases where this feels like it's still very photographic. This tip feels more photographic, and then in parts of the stem or where this part comes down. And so I like that kind of blend of where things look more or less painterly in the same image. There's something about this sort of neutral, almost black and white, but then this other warmer tone mixed in there that works really well. Anyone else comments?
I think it's really pretty. It's just the lighter white flares up in the right corner. Tone those down maybe, make more gray, more to match the other color around it.
Yeah, and that's a good comment too.
Here
Is
in the right,
in the upper right corner is what you're saying, Ann, up in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, those things.
The and again because you have all the layers or whatever you were working on, but I mean a real kind of simple technique here is either going to color or multiply or whatever. Grabbing the eyedropper tool and sort of sampling maybe almost the brightest warm area there, and then on this multiply layer and maybe even at brush at we'll say 10%, even just in these areas like where they feel a little bit too bright, just brushing that tone in. So I could probably go a little stronger. This layer got switched to 10%. So if I turn that off
There
and
you go.
on, so I mean, yeah, you can dial that in,
I,
and then the same in here, just to get rid of some of that blown out feeling. It isn't going to take a whole lot of color,
right.
but even that little bit there helps it too. Yeah.
On that upper right corner, I kind of like that white
Mm-hmm.
because, without it burned in like
Yeah.
that, because it kind of, I don't know, it sort of finishes it off for me for some reason.
Well,
For me, it
It just
took my eye away from
more
the flower.
uh-huh.
real. Okay, well, yeah.
I agree
this-
liking the white. I like the white.
Okay.
You like
I
the
like the
white
fact
better?
yeah, I like the fact that it's distracting because it's not a photograph. It's a painting.
Right. It sort of takes you up there and then you stop. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's
Mm-hmm.
something,
All right.
but I like the way you burn in the white on the one petal.
Yeah, I mean that's
I
just
think
kind of
that helps.
simple. I mean, it doesn't take much when you have those warm tones. But I love the idea that there's that sort of contrast between some color and then some stuff that is almost feeling, neutral in value. The sort of the gray strokes and parts of the flower that feel closer to white. I think it works.
What about that white in the bottom where, say, right,
Right
yeah,
here.
right about there in the middle of your yeah, right, well,
Oops, let me grab my
right
brush.
there.
Uh,
Is that too much white? Maybe.
it's amazing how just
That
a
may be
tiny bit,
better.
will kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. I think, I mean, unless something is like glaringly a problem, it's one of those things that, what could be wrong? I mean, it's such an interpretive image of the original piece that unless something's glaringly off, I think anything that you do at this point is going to be a subtle change.
I agree with Judge number one, Paul Lawrence.
Uh-oh.
On the upper right?
Here's
I like that. I did like toning down a little bit down in the lower, lower quadrant
Mm-hmm.
there of the image. Your eye's going to go to the brightest part of the image. That's clearly those petals.
Mm-hmm.
It's a terrific work you did,
Yeah.
Joe.
yeah.
Yeah, I think where you said, Joan,
It was
this
fun.
this area in the bottom, so that's with that layer off, and this is with it on. It's even just a small change, but like Don's saying is, your eye kind of goes to this bright area. I mean, almost no matter what you do, this is going to still be the brightest area of the image, so you're still drawn into that
Right.
flower.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all.
All right, look at that hair.
Now,
All these
some
things.
girls that have that hair would straighten
Right?
it every
Yeah,
day.
right. Yeah. And then the girl who has a straight hair wants to curly it every day. What's wrong
Right.
with us? We're just never happy. All right. Thanks, Joan. All right. Last and least is Mr. Paul Lawrence. I just
Uh-oh.
want to see. Somehow I ended up with Joan's folder in there too.
Did you miss a folder, Gary?
Oh, I did. Yeah. Wait a minute. Paul can't go yet because then he won't be last. So there's Gary. Did Gary fall asleep? So Gary sent this image in just before we went online, so I didn't get a chance to really even look at it. Well, I'll just open it in Photoshop, and then we can kind of. This will truly be a on the fly. So tell us about your photo, Gary. Where is this at?
Probably back in the trip that we had in what country was that? There we go. Ghent?
Ghent. I don't know where Ghent is.
Either Belgium or France or better.
Okay. So I think for me, I mean, the building feels like it's leaning to the left a bit. And so in Photoshop, you can drag out guides. That's a great way to kind of like see, where lines are not perfectly parallel. They're actually, so maybe the whole image has a bit of a lean to it. So you could do, even before doing a transform, you could even try doing a rotate, right? So if I started, let me do a, so if I tried to rotate this to where those lines, right about there, better, maybe a tad far. on the one side. There we go. So we'll call that good. And then again, so you could either crop where those empty pixels are, or you could fill them in. I don't think there's anything there that is really that interesting. You have to now with the crop tool, you got to make sure you have it set to the right setting. So I want to just go to the regular default setting, and you could, like I said, you could fill those empty pixels. And the only one that I would want to change is this top because of the top of the church is there. So I'll try leaving that where it's at. So maybe we'll do a little bit of both and something like that. And so I'm gonna go ahead and commit that crop. And I could have done it with the generative expand. Go back to the crop. Come on. Oh, my shortcuts aren't wanting to work. And see if we pull that up just a bit, maybe even more than a bit. See if it'll generate that or not. I'm gonna go ahead and say delete the crop pixels, generative expand, and do your thing. So they keep adding more tips here too. So while you're bored watching this thing move, you can perform multiple actions simultaneously, such as cropping and expanding and rotating. It's like it watched me do the last move and go, well, that's kind of funky. But so we have 3 choices. Ooh, that's kind of cool. A little flag on top. Whether it's accurate or not, that's another story. There's just a spire. That's probably close to accurate. So anyhow, we got the expansion on the top. It feels a little more comfortable without having it cropped in so tight. And then, let me get rid of those guides. And then, the sky, again, this is one of those things where, the exposure for the sky could be a little darker. So we could try doing, and again, I'll avoid using the Kuiper panel too much. So I'll go to select, and we'll go to select sky. See how well it does. Not so good because I didn't do the top layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge. Let me do this. I'll duplicate this one here, and then merge these two together. So everything will be as one. And now do the sky selection. So select sky. And somebody might want to opt for doing a sky replacement, but I'm going to try just seeing if I can actually either use curves to just darken the sky. So we end up with a mask, which, this sky selection does a pretty darn good job. And the one thing about this sort of blown out sky is that it's got an overly kind of a cyan look to it. So because I'm using a curve, I could also come back in and I could add, say, a little bit of red to the sky. It doesn't take a lot to neutralize that cyan, but that's that. And so, but if I wanted to do a sky replacement, I could. The other thing I could try too, to see if I put this into a multiply mode. It's starting to kind of funky up those whites. But anyhow, again, whether you're shooting raw or not, that would be the place to have done it, is in the original raw file. Another technique here would be to, since it's already in Photoshop, is if I made it, what am I thinking here? If I made it a smart object, new group of layers, where's my, right there. And then only because I'm going to use a filter, or not a filter, but an image adjustment. And so an adjustment, I'll use the shadow highlight adjustment. And by default, it wants to add more shadow detail, which I don't think I really need much of. I could open up that tree area a little bit, but mostly the highlights. So this will bring me back some more sky value. I can play with how much of the tone I want it to affect. And radius is going to control any halos or weird flattening. And then I could add a little mid-tone contrast to it, and also a little bit of color saturation. And say, okay, so that's the shadow highlight without going in, and also the generative fill on the top part, but without having to go back to camera raw, and then now if I bring in this other adjustment, I don't need it on multiply. If I go back to normal, and then maybe I don't need quite as much, so I could still use this to also darken the image too, and maybe add a little contrast to it. So even that little bit, and working on a JPEG, I mean, just that little bit changes it by quite a bit. Any comments from anybody? And then ultimately,
I think the blue over in the trees showing through the sky, showing through the trees at the top left is sort of a different colored blue than the new sky.
and that's probably coming from, I mean, it's way over the top, right? So if I go back to, let's see which, and so it's a question of, is it this? No. So it's more of that. So it's that shadow highlight adjustment that we did. So, but I could probably still come in here. Let me come from here. I'll go to the top. So I could bring in a hue saturation layer, and then I want to target a specific color, that really strong blue. I'm going to imagine it's just in the blue panel, but let's click on that. So in the blues, and we'll target that color specifically. And hopefully, if we can target that and not this, that's what you're trying to do, is eliminate that little bit of a blue halo. So yeah, it's going to have a hard time finding that sky. So if I maybe bring this mask to here and invert it. Yeah, so now I can go back to here and just be a little more aggressive on that blue. There. So how much is that? It shouldn't be affecting the sky at all. Yeah, no. So there we go. All the blues out of the trees. Okay. And then, I mean, it looks like it could use some sharpening and, you know, all that. So, again, the topaz adjustments do such a great job on sharpening. Topaz, sharpen. And so the only thing here is going to be when you come into here, we're not going to be able to see the adjustment layers that are above it, but we're really looking for, and it's a fairly small image because you see we're already at 100%. But what I could do is I'll just let it go ahead and do its default sharpening. So this will, on the sharpen model, there's about, I don't know, 6 or 8 different algorithms you can use. If you click this button on, it will choose the sharpening model for you. For whatever reason here, it's chosen motion blur, very blurry. And then this also sets up the parameters down here automatically too. So once that gets done, we'll just accept it. And the cool thing too is, and we'll do it in a second, so I'll just say apply. And then take a little bit of time there, and when it gets done, because I did it as a smart object, it looks like also that blue in the water is a little over the top, but that could be dialed back too. Maybe even on the same mask, just brush that area through on that blue one. And if, when that gets done, so there it is there. Unfortunately, that ends up at 200%. So, yeah, it's most of the softness is looking from, I'm gonna go back through that, is looking, is because of blowing it up past 100%. The original file size is,
Right.
it's less than 800 pixels on the width. So that's one of the reasons why it looks a little soft. So I'm not gonna wait for that to go back through. But yeah, those sharpening things do a great job. Interesting that blue, I think, was because of the masking that we did wasn't showing up inside of topaz. So
You know, to me, the whole image seems a little overexposed, maybe by a stop or two, or a stop.
So we can do it a couple of ways, but so we can just use a basic curve if we want to. But I would say you're about right.
Yeah.
So the funny thing is that the blend modes, the formula is supposed to be multiply is equal to one stop. That to me is like way more than one stop, but that's supposedly the formula.
Oh,
And so you could dial back
right.
multiply. I mean that's probably, I don't think it's a full stop anyhow. But the other thing you can do too, again with the blend mode, is if I double click here, I can go into the blend if function and dial the effect back out of the shadows. So if I want to do that so the shadows don't get too dark. So that's before, that's after. So I get a little bit more detail in there. And then that way, that's 36% of a multiply mode. No really curve adjustment there. And then the shadows blended back, and that does help it. So let's save that file and save. And okay. And so there's where we started, and there's where we ended up without really doing anything overly spectacular to it. It's interesting that extra blue was already there, and here it's actually toned back, I think, when we pulled that blue out. All right, any comments for Gary here? Okay, thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I had a little problem with the camera.
Oh, don't we all? I'd be an expert.
Just before,
I'd be an expert photographer if it wasn't for the camera.
well, it died.
All right, Mr.
camera
Mr.
died.
Paul Lawrence.
Okay.
Before
That's all. That's all.
you got a lisp?
Yeah.
Having a left paper, that's all.
When I first got the camera, I would and when I was living up in Valencia, I would go for walks in the woods, and I'd walk out with the wide angle lens up, the wide angle zoom, and then as I walk back, switch over to the telephoto.
Wow.
So this is just a straight telephoto shot, taking advantage of the fact that it's going to go out of focus in the background.
So this was your before, and there's your correction. Obviously, you're taking that corner piece out.
Yeah.
There's a weird little highlight here or something. And then
Junk.
Any comments for Paul?
Junk.
We have a quiet group tonight that does not want to participate.
That's not.
The background and the colors. You did a good job.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the same thing to this one that I did to Anne's. I actually cropped it in a little bit too and flipped it, and I think I brightened it up a little bit too. I'll show you the. I think this
Yeah, I like that much
was a
better.
little bit of a.
Actually,
Yeah.
So let's see. All right, so there's the original. Using Camera Raw to bring out some shadow detail and to brighten up overall.
Yeah.
Curve adjustment to lighten up
Better.
just the flower itself. So there's probably just a object selection or select subject, and then a reverse of that to darken the background just a little bit. So if you turn those two off and on, you get that sense of that the flower comes forward a little bit more, and then that high pass contrast for mid-tone contrast kind of just, and not, it's at 50%, so it's still pretty strong. But I like what it does to all of the details in here too. So, but I love those colors.
Yeah, that made it much better.
So there's before, there's after,
And the
Yeah.
little white
Yeah,
spot.
that makes
and the little
the
white
spiky
splash
things
guy,
show out.
Yeah, it's like somebody turned on a light. I always think of that.
Yeah.
I
Nice.
wish I had fill flash, and you go, oh, you do. It's right here. It's called a curve with a mask. So, all right. Any comments or questions or concerns or any wishes? That's even better. Do you wish?
I think maybe the white in the
Yeah.
uh,
So again, that's one of those things. If you
should be
going back to the raw
that
file,
white.
the other thing is, you could do kind of like what we did on Joan's image. You could do the same thing, with a new empty fill layer, um, and then by selecting sort of a brighter green. It's not going to take a lot, but let's see, where's a green? Maybe. Well, I'll take that green and then. So here's the thing is, so I'm selecting that green, and I would really kind of like a brighter green. So if I open up that foreground color and using this HSB. So I don't want to change the hue because I've taken that directly off the color of the plant. I don't really want to change the saturation. That would be this panel here. But what I do want to change is the brightness. So here is that same hue and a brightness control of it. So over here's my color. As I pull this up and say, I actually just want to fill in those highlights just a bit. So I'm in the same hue, but all I've done was brighten it up. So these little HSB buttons will help you control those things individually without getting away from the original hue. So usually if you're trying to drag this thing around, you could end up in the wrong place. So those kind of give you a little more control. And then on this layer, again, you can set it to multiply, or you can set it to one of the color blend modes. But we'll take a brush and still, even though we've got a brighter color, because we're in a multiply mode, I'm at 10%, and I could pull up a selection of the highlights, but if I come into here, again, just knocking them down, and the great thing is, because we're surrounded by these other colors, the only thing you don't want to do is get outside, make it fill in this area back here. So you can, maybe make a selection, but I think this will probably work just as well. And it really just is to knock it down a little bit. And, you could do this all day long if you want to. This area here is pretty bright, so I might take it up to say 20% just to get it done a little quicker. A little too much. So one of the things you can do is, where I've gotten it too strong here, is either use the eraser tool again, and put the eraser tool on a very low function, maybe down around not 2%, but maybe at about 10%. And then start erasing the color a little bit. That looks better. And then if we look at that, it just burns those in a little bit. Still a little strong up here, but so you can dial that back. Sometimes instead of erasing, I'll just put a mask on it and then slowly paint over those areas to dial it back a little bit. But that works. All right. And then
Cool.
This looks like we're back to your slide project.
This is Peru, up somewhere on Machu Picchu, up at the high end of Peru, wherever we happen to be. And the more I went into this, the more abstract it became. I think that there's probably some topaz work in here too, but the more abstract it became, and I really like the fact that it became abstract.
And so you saying you think you did do some topaz to it also?
I'm pretty sure I did some topaz also. So between the lens was a 35 to 105 Canon, which was made out of used Coke bottles, and so it never was particularly sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And then with this strong an enlargement, it starts to really, I think it really start to take advantage of the fact that the thing isn't sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And then I added some topaz effects to it.
Too good, Mom. You know, it's cool.
So just putting some contrast back in, I would go ahead and put this to to a luminosity mode, and then dial back that strength. I don't think it needs to be pure black, but even there at about 30%, it just adds a little more depth to the back end maybe. All right. Any comments for Paul? Tweet, 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 tweet. That's my cricket sound. Cheep, cheep, cheep. No, I love the color in it. This warm and the blues against the cool tones in the background. And you're right. There's like it's well again because you've used topaz. Like I say, it's almost painterly, but it really kind of is. But it's about that same level of detail that you would have in a painting, which sometimes is a a great solution to the like if we go back here and compare the two of them, how much of an area you've pulled out of that pretty small space there. So sometimes there's an advantage to recognizing your disadvantage, and that would be the disadvantage is it's been severely cropped, and so you take that sort of idea of lack of detail, and I think using the topaz thing probably helped that along. So let's say file, save, and in the right place, back to here. So it also puts a little more, using that a little extra contrast, a little more detail into this foreground that's interesting too. All right. Any comments for Paul?
Yeah.
Nope. Okay. I like it.
I like
There's
it.
your
Good.
Here's your straight image.
This is before. This is on the previous one in Peru. This is the daughter of the sound man
Uh-huh.
who was on that job, and she is an artist, does tapestries and paintings, and so I just wanted to do something that had a bit for me that had a bit of a Dutch feeling because they're Dutch, and didn't do too much. I applied again. This is topaz. I don't think I did any regenerative fill, although I may have on the background because I find that it's kind of useful as long as I don't want to get any detail out of it. And then I just brought our eyes forward from one of the sharper lower layers. So this was run through topaz sharpen and topaz denoise also.
And the coloring in the face was I think a little bit on the red side, but also took some of the red down. It's a little too in this image. I think I took a little too much out of the bottom end here. Again, that could be masked separately, but I also then brought some light into her face. So maybe a little too much, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is the right idea, and I agree with you. It's definitely
Oh
over
no!
the
Here's
top.
what I did. I'm glad I opened this. So this is interesting. So I played with it in a couple of different ways.
I'm out of line.
So there's the image. I made a duplicate and I ran it through the neural filter called photo restoration because I wanted to see what it would do to it, and that's it. Even because it even sharpened some of this part of the image. And I think that's all I did was use the neural photo restoration, and then I wondered what it would look like, in black and white. And then, of course, with black and white, you can control how bright the face is. And so some of that came out of pulling up the reds or the yellows. And so then I made a composite layer out of the black and white because, and I didn't really have to, because I ran it back through the neural filters and did the neural colorize. So I colorized the black and white to get it back to color again. And so that's where the color came from. So I could have, this color has a little bit too much green in it. So the idea here would be even just comparing. So this would be all the colorized from taking the black and white image without the mask, taking the black and white image, back to color using, and I think I did, I took the mask down. I didn't dial it back, so I left the background neutral. I think I would have, now looking at it, I would put some color back in the background. Actually, I don't know if I mind it with just the color the way that it is. Yeah.
And can we see just the background layer again for a second?
Yeah.
Yeah. Somehow along the way, and I had noticed this but didn't bother to go back to try and fix it down at the original level. But I seem to have aligned a couple of layers, and you can see in her hand that there's
Oh,
almost a double
yeah, a
exposure
little
with
ghost
her
there.
hand and
Yeah,
her,
yeah.
yeah, and her forearm. And it seems to me that what you did with the filters emphasized that.
Yeah, in a way, it kind of got rid of the ghost, but still made it look like it's wider than it should be. Yeah. But yeah, it was interesting. I mean, something that I would not have probably thought about doing is using the neural filter. I mean, basically, you've taken the photo, made it more painterly. Then I asked it to do a photo restoration on it, so it even cleaned up some of the painterly stuff. Now, the other thing that I could have done too, and again, this could go on and on, is you could dial back some of the photo restoration, and then do the black and white conversion, and then put it back to colorize. And it's amazing how this neural filter on colorizing does such a great job of taking a black and white filter, a black and white image back to color, especially in recognizing, eyes and face. And because you have to remember, I mean, this top photo came from the all black and white one, so it even chose the color of her
Right.
eyes, the lips, and all that stuff. Because in here, it's not referencing the original background layer. The only thing it's referencing is
All right.
the black and white one. So it's even interesting to see that um, in the original, her eyes are sort of blue gray. And so I wonder if it has a way of looking at black and white values and deciding whether that would be brown or blue based on how dark those values are in the black and white photograph. Yeah, interesting.
Well, yeah, back in the black and white days, uh, the good cinematographers would always know what color, what a certain color eye was going to come
Right,
out as on their black and white film.
right.
So it's has some of that sense
Now
in
I
it.
remember, maybe since you have that whole cinematography background, maybe you can say yes, it's true or it's not. But I remember hearing that maybe even as far back going into some of the early black and white movies, that a lot of times they shot with because again you could use any filter on a camera at that point you want because you're not going to see the color, but using a green filter. And so again, this would be like looking at this and say, if we go to the red, green, blue. So if I use the red filter on the camera, it would, the face would go really bright like this. If you use the blue filter, it would get really dark. But if you use the green filter, you got a more natural looking flesh tone.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that's necessarily, true or not.
It's certainly possible. I never heard that because really when I came in, we were already
Color.
98%
Yeah.
color. But what I did hear was James Wong Howe, I think it was, who had an actress who had very light blue eyes, and she was really a frontline actress. But one day he accidentally got her eyes to be darker on camera, and she said, "If you can do that, you're my cinematographer forever." And I figured out that he had hung a black uh, a black Duvetine in front of or behind the camera, but as a reflection, and her bright eyes or light eyes
Toned down.
reflected
Huh.
the black and came across darker.
Yeah.
So yeah, those cats were just amazing in what they could do.
Also, what's interesting, I didn't notice now either, is when it colorized this space back here. So this is the original. It's the green background color. In the colorized version, it made it this sort of weird pink color.
Oh yeah.
Right?
That's weird.
Anyhow, if you haven't played much with the neural filters, so under filter and neural filters, I have to be on an image layer to do that. There's I think there's some possibilities. I mean, just like looking at this quick exercise here, of going through neural filters and seeing what they do with the image, and again that idea of turning something black and white and then using the color. Where did it go? Depth blur, JPEG. Photo restoration was the first one I used, and then the other one was colorize. The colorize of the black and white image back to color again can maybe create some interesting effects. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool things in here. And by the way, these are all totally AI. These are things that are using AI functions that have been here in Photoshop for quite a while. And I still marvel at the idea that no photo clubs or the fair or nobody else said anything about using these filters, that you couldn't use them. And even to the point where, like this isn't a landscape image, but that you could go in and you can make an image, a landscape image, a sunset, a sunrise. You can turn it into a winter photograph. You can turn it into a summer, spring photograph. It totally adds in brand new pixels that aren't part of the original images. Not just colorizing the photograph, it's actually looking at the image, adding snow, adding flowers, changing it to fall, summer, sunset, sunrise. So you can use all of these to completely change what your landscape photograph looks like. And again, it's totally 100% AI.
Why don't you run one of those on her and see what
I
happens?
don't know if it'll. Let's see. So because Landscape Mixer in this version is still a beta, so that's okay. I have to load it up, and then let's say if we go, it might take the colorizing part of it, and so let's just say you can do them manually here also. So you have day, night, sunset, spring, summer, autumn, winter, and you can kind of let's see if it puts a parka on her. And this could be the thing is that it might even recognize. Oh, there it goes. I was going to say it might recognize as not a landscape photograph and not do anything, but I've never tried running one of these on a portrait. That would be funny if it does put a parka on her. cover her in snow. It's struggling.
Your comment about making it, have the feel of the Dutch masters, made me think it might be fun to try some Rembrandt light on her face, shadowing that left side, but leaving the eye, a little brighter.
Mm-hmm.
So there's winter.
Yeah, it's definitely a road to go down.
Stay there.
But now that she's in an ice cave in a James Bond movie, I'm not sure that.
So I turned off the preserve subject, so we'll see what it does if it does more of a change. Because I guess again in this case would have identified her as a subject. There you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, that's
right.
Nice.
That's got Paul Lawrence written all over it.
That is very nice.
So let's see. Let's try another season on her. So autumn. They all take a second or two to run, and of course you can.
Yeah, I think the idea of the Rembrandt lighting works better if there is a visible light source.
Right.
Yeah, and you could certainly add that, but there is already that right light.
Yeah, there is an angled light source on her, but I mean, the idea of having a window in there is so that we look at it and say, oh, I get it, the light is coming to her from the window.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? The one that you did before?
Winter
was
the best
That was
one.
Gorgeous.
So far.
Winter, okay.
Puts flowers in her hair for spring. So this is mostly, it's weird. It's shifting color values, but wherever it comes up with that weird outline is pretty strange. Well, odd. So I would say winter. Winter made the most interesting one.
I think the castle picture would look good. with
Where
the
are you
midnight.
getting these? That
Yeah.
one. Love
That
that
one's
one.
very
And then if I
cool.
put preserve back on, let's see what
Right.
it does.
I got to fool
Okay.
around with that some more.
Didn't do. Oh, there it goes. Yeah.
Larry, where do you get these
Just under the filter
filters? The
menu, and
landscape
then
menu.
down to neural filter is the third one from the top here, and it will launch. The
Oh,
only thing you have to
okay.
do is you have to turn them on to use them, because it's actually loading. They actually function in the cloud, so they're going. The whole function happens up in the cloud. Yeah. So preserve subject doesn't do anything to her. If you turn off the preserve subject, you get that effect.
That has sort of a Picasso
Yeah, right.
look
This
for
weird
some
thing with the
reason.
Yeah, I
nose.
love that. The regenerative fill has a cubist thing in it, and the guy or the person who designed that filter clearly had no idea what cubism is, but this really comes quite close to it. This is great.
Wow, so that was that 50%, and it didn't really change much. All right, I gotta do one more. See what it does for nighttime. It actually
Fun,
would be
isn't it?
interesting to see too. Once this gets done, to see what the night looks like. You can combine some of these together too, and see what it does. So we could do night and winter.
That's way too many
I know.
options. You could end up spending days
Yes.
on
Yeah.
image.
Yeah.
Right.
See, so much for button pushing. Oh, you're just pushing a bunch of buttons. Yeah, so the night's a bit strong.
That's right.
Ooh. Interesting. Same thing here is like, so you could come out here, right? So you have an output level here, so you can say new layer, output that one, then go back in and then do another version of it without the night filter on and just the winter filter, and then mask in and mask out the things that you want from each one of them. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. That is so interesting. I mean, she might not like it, but
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do this if you had a paying job. All right.
I had a cousin say to me, or a cousin's husband say to me a few years ago, that the photographs I took of an event, a family event, gave him a headache, and I took that as a great compliment.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for jumping in. Those of you who stayed till the end, I am taking down names so that I can reward those people who are the clingers, the people who cling to the end. You'll notice Don Lyons is gone, so that will go on his report card. so thanks everybody. Remember,
Next time I'm doing a winter portrait of him.
DPX is coming up on the 28th, next couple of weeks, and if you want to send in any images or just jump in for the conversation, that's certainly there. So thanks everybody for doing this, and thanks for sharing your images, everybody who did. And again, the meetings are recorded, so they will be on the YouTube channel sometime tomorrow. And you get, if you're all members of the DP or the meetup site usually. And I'm wondering, does everybody usually get the announcement from the site, or I usually put a thing out saying that the two, yeah, so it wouldn't come from Meetup. Well, it does come from Meetup, but I put it. It's a special email that I do through Meetup, saying that the video is posted, and there's usually a link inside the email. Does anybody get that?
No.
So if you're not getting it, just know that usually they're posted the day after the meetings, and any of the past ones they're always there, so you can go look at any of them if you want to. The good news is there is a fast forward button, rewind button, so you don't have to watch the whole thing. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great evening. and we will see
You
you
too. Thanks.
at
You
the
too.
next
I don't-
night.